Good day, everyone. I'm George Evans from Convergence, and I want to welcome you to our 34th episode of In Conversation with Convergence. As many of you know, over the 3 years we've been doing this, we meet with clients to discuss some of the top issues facing the industry. I'm joined today by a really, really great guest, Rosie Raymond-Sidel, and Rosemary, but we're going to call her Rosie today. And Rosie is from Integrum Holdings, and she has just a terrific pedigree. We're going to meet Rosie today, but Rosie, I'm doing a little homework on you, Rosie. I've seen your stints at Apollo and KKR and JP Morgan. So very well pedigreed, and I just want to really welcome you. It's great to have you here, and so welcome aboard today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, listen, why don't you first tell us a little bit about you, Rosie? So we want our listeners to kind of know a little bit about you, your background, and then we'll get into kind of your role at Integrum.
Sure. Nice to meet everyone virtually. I'm Rosie. I graduated from Princeton and went into banking mostly out of not knowing what else I wanted to do. Seemed like something that was going to be hard, and I was always up for a challenge. And out of school, I did 2 years of investment banking, and then I went to KKR, where I was for 8 years. KKR had an interesting hybrid role. It was an investing role, but it was primarily focused on KKR's principal capital, so KKR's balance sheet. Did some private equity style investing, but inevitably that kind of lends itself to some more operational type work as well. And so now in my current role, where I think a lot about Office of the CFO and sort of some investing opportunities are in that sector, it was super helpful to have done things at KKR like help to oversee the budget process, or worked a lot on kind of various corporate development type activities. So had a really great experience there. After the pandemic, I think I decided it was just time for a change. So I was at Apollo, and then got a call from the folks at Integrum, where I currently am. Integrum is a new firm. We just closed on our first fund. And one of the founders, Tager Olson, formerly ran financial services, private equity investing at KKR. And so have known him for a long time and have always admired the work that he does. And so it was a really awesome opportunity to come over.
Yeah. How big, for our listeners, Rosie, how big is Integrum in terms of headcount?
We're under 30 headcount, between 20 and 30. And last year we closed on our first fund at $1 billion. We run a pretty concentrated portfolio, so we're probably only going to do 5 or 6 investments in our first fund. And we tend to, want to spend a lot of time with the folks that we do partner with.
Yeah. In terms of the portfolio today, can you share a little bit about the investments you guys have made to date?
We made several investments in the portfolio today. They're all on our website. Most are in, I would say, the broader financial and insurance services space, including insurance distribution. I encourage folks to check out the deals that we've done.
Okay, great. What's kind of Integrum's bigger play? Like Fund 2, Fund 3? Can you speak to a little bit about the vision there?
Yeah, sure. I think the vision goes back to kind of why Integrum started in the first place. I think Integrum was really focused on it's a lot of folks that have been at a lot of different firms, and Integrum is what you get when you have a lot of smart people who spend a lot of time at other places thinking about what kind of firm they want to build. And so what we have is a firm that's tremendously actually diverse, despite the fact that that was not necessarily the intent with which we started. The intent was to build a top tier financial and business services, tech-enabled business services investing firm. But interestingly, what we have is the most diverse firm I've ever worked at. And so our investing team is, I think, majority women, which is something that you rarely see in the industry. But I think what happens when you start from scratch really purposefully. Our 3 founders are Tager Olson, Ursula Burns, who used to run Xerox, and has had a whole bunch of other kind of leadership roles, both on boards and otherwise. And then Richard Kunzer, who was at VC Partners for a long time. And so all of them got together and kind of said, like, here, if we could start from scratch, what would it look like? And that's really what we're doing. I think we've had some success on the investment side. But really that's the result of some, very purposeful team and culture building that they did very early on. And so it's a privilege to be here. I'm relatively new. I joined the firm in June of 23. So
Okay,
6, 7
yeah,
months.
no, it's we're about 6, 7 months into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The and is the are you mostly based in New York, the firm, Rosie, for our listeners?
Yep, we're predominantly in New York, and we're predominantly in office, which, I'm old, so it's a very nice thing for me to actually be back in the office and get to like work with people in person. But I realize that some folks don't see it that way.
Yeah, well, listen, there's lots of schools of thought on that. That's a remote and hybrid is a topic for another podcast, right? Listen, let's talk about uh, uh, before we talk about 24, just your thoughts on 23 briefly, right? Like, when you kind of look in the rearview mirror now a little bit, what did you think about the marketplace? What did you think, maybe were the opportunities in the market? What do you think maybe some of the missed opportunities might have been, right? And I'm sure those things kind of shape your view for 2024, right?
Totally. I mean, I think, in years like 2023, when a lot is changing, but actually not a lot is transacting, it's easy to try and do too much. For us, I think 2023 was really a year to kind of think and learn about the sectors that we're really focused on, where folks might not have been really eager to lean in and transact yet, and try not to get involved in situations where there are transactions taking place, but because there are not a lot, they're very crowded.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think everyone was really eager to transact last year. I think in part because the fundraising environment was challenging. And so they needed to kind of give back some capital to, raise for the next fund. We were very lucky in that we were not in that position. But I think the temptation is always to want to put out capital quickly, or at least at a steady pace. And in years like 23, where there's just not a lot of deal volume given kind of rates and resetting of expectations on value, we were really cautious around not getting out over our skis.
Well, you bring up a really good point because, kind of the macro thing you constantly heard it throughout 23 is, oh, there's lots of dry powder, there's lots of dry powder, there's lots of dry powder, right? And I think there is, right? But I also thought there were so few deals, right?
Really not a
That,
lot of activity. Yeah.
yeah, that it creates almost this crazy auction type environment, right? Where good maybe for the seller who might be getting a premium, right? And things over. Did you think things that went to market in general, without being specific, were overvalued? What's your view? Because of kind of that auction, or what do you think?
I think the things that went to market were generally auction processes. There weren't a lot of kind of off deals done outside of those processes, at least in the spaces that we track. And so I think that is conducive to, things being bid up to higher prices. But I think, more importantly, I think it was around not just jumping at the first opportunity.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
being measured.
We only do so few deals in our fund that we can wait for the perfect situation.
Yeah,
It's a privilege, right? And so in terms of our partner, in terms of the kind of structural and other dynamics, maybe problems that are, the management teams that we partner with are trying to solve, in terms of transaction dynamics, include in terms of potentially partners, that are the investors that will invest alongside, including potentially our own co-investors. I think we can kind of wait for that right fit, but doing that doesn't feel natural to any of us, right? All of us
well,
like
no,
deals all
right,
the time.
right. But you brought up an interesting point earlier about 23 and kind of doing your homework and doing your research, right? And that's really, how we got to meet Integrum, right?
That's right.
You guys were looking at a certain market, and we were able to kind of give you, some good historical data on that market, which was, I think, part of obviously what you said, what you were kind of spent a lot of time doing in 23, right? Like kind of refining your research, right around, respective markets, right? So,
Yeah, so much of our goal as private equity investors is to not be tourists in people's industries, right? And to the extent that we're going to commit to focusing on an industry, we want to be native speakers, and that involves finding the smartest people in those industries, and that's how we found you guys. And I think some of that involves understanding that you don't know everything, but everyone's least favorite private equity guy is, somebody comes in and has spent about a minute researching and like thinks they know everything. And so we really try not to be those people, which involves kind of more reading and thinking and listening to podcasts and other things than sometimes I think as deal focused people we want to spend time on. But then we're able to be credible when we're in the situations that we want to be in, and that means a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I do think we've seen lots of, I'll call them investment bankers that are, two questions deep on a lot of segments, right? So I think it's a great approach to be that credible. Let's shift to 24, and I know I want you to be veiled, and I don't want you to give away your vision and strategy for the whole market, but love to hear a little bit about the firm's focus in 24, really kind of where you think you want to play, where you're going to spend your time researching and hopefully participating kind of in some transactions in the market.
Yeah, for sure. I think Q1 so far has been the year that everyone kind of anticipated, or the quarter that everyone kind of anticipated. So throughout really 22 and 23, people kept saying like we're getting ready to bring some stuff to market. We're getting ready. And in Q1, all 30 days of it so far, we've really seen that. We've been really busy. There's a lot of folks, and I'm not exactly sure what happened. I think maybe price expectations kind of moderated enough that people think there are a lot of potential buyers. I think maybe the macro environment just kind of quieted enough that people feel like they have a little bit of space and time to think about what's next. But we're seeing a lot of flow. I would say we're trying to be really thoughtful around how to fill out our portfolio. We have a lot of experience and relationships in tech-enabled business and insurance services, including insurance distribution. And then also we're really focusing on this sort of office of the CFO concept. So, and usually, at least as it relates to my deals, what that means is office of the CFO in the context of financial services businesses.
Yeah.
Right. I don't really know anything about industrials businesses, so really hard for me to go to a CFO and say like, hey, you really need this. But I really do know private equity firms, right, and other kind of financial services businesses like annuity businesses. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about the office of the CFO in the context of those businesses and what products they're looking really to buy, not be sold to, but really what are obvious kind of sales to them. And so we, as you mentioned, that's how we met you. And we've been spending kind of a lot of time in that eco. I think in part because it would just be a nice fit with our existing portfolio, and in part because it's an area where we feel like we can add a reasonable amount of value.
Yeah, I mean, without being too specific, when you say there's a lot of flow, and that doesn't mean you participate in all that flow, but what have you seen? Like, if you had to kind of box some of it, like how would you box some of the flow you're seeing in terms of the type of industries and segments with maybe the most flow? What do you think, Rosie?
It's a great question. And to some degree, our flow is idiosyncratic, so hard for me to extrapolate from my observation to the broader market in a way that I might have been more able to, in years where I was at a place that did a much broader set of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would say what we're really seeing these days is interesting business services opportunities. So opportunities, you see this in Europe where a lot of folks have services groups, but in the US, you actually don't see that as often. And so a lot of the opportunities that we're looking at are opportunities that don't fit cleanly in the context of a mega fund kind of industry group, right? It's not really, it might be kind of tech, but it's not purely tech. It might be kind of financial services, but it's not purely financial services. We have participated in various processes that bankers are involved with in everything from kind of FIG to middle market to actually industrials groups, because it's not entirely clear where some of these hybrid opportunities fit. But I think we're really kind of well positioned to underwrite opportunities like that other folks may struggle to even staff. And we have a lot of experience kind of thinking about the intersection of financial services, technology, and business services.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, there's very overused acronyms now, right? SAS, DAS, right? But what I could tell you from our experience is when I think, for example, about just as one example, when I think of about the service provider industry to the asset management world, right? It is so overcrowded, and it has been so easy to hang a shingle and get started that it's in dire need of consolidation. I think private equity companies have helped, fuel a lot of that consolidation, and I do think the gap is increasing. I think, it's clearly the 80-20 rule: the bigger are getting bigger, and the smaller are treading water or getting smaller. I also think what's interesting, without getting into much detail on this, there's been a lot of SEC new rules in 23, 24, especially one called the service provider rule, which is really going to force um, asset managers to really define why some of these service providers are appropriate. And I think it's going to force the service providers, as an example, to kind of almost justify their existence, right? And why they kind of can grow. So I think, I think that's one example that we think the flow is going to continue to be. The other comment I'd make, Rosie, I don't know if you have any observations on this. We've also seen a lot of flow from kind of the Europe, like I'd kind of call it the EU, looking to buy properties, and establish U.S. beachheads, right? So whether it's, compliance or fund administration or cyber or managed IT or outsourced CFO, CCO, whatever those services are, a lot of them are seeing that as an entryway, into the U.S.
Yeah. And I think, expect we'll continue to see this consolidation in the market just because despite what you mentioned, it's still a very consolidated market, including a lot of folks doing this stuff in-house, right, for themselves. And so as, old funds, for example, run off and new funds come on and people kind of rethink the most efficient way to do things, especially now that the landscape is so sophisticated, I think we'll continue to see that evolution and that consolidation happen. I think, one thing we are cautious around is just M&A for M&A's sake. And I think we see some of that.
Yeah.
We like doing transactions. We do a lot of transactions. We do a lot of add-on transactions. But, an M&A roll-up is never our thesis. We are operators and we're growth-minded, but we also like organic growth. It's never our kind of sole objective. And so when I see these businesses kind of, being swept up, I think the question I ask myself is, are they going to come back to market at some point because it turns out that it wasn't necessarily a fit? And I think we'll perhaps see that some of that unwinding of things that, maybe perhaps didn't make any sense to put together in the first place.
Yeah.
And so we try and, keep in touch with folks, even if we decide that an acquisition isn't a fit, because it's very possible that in the future, people will be kind of rethinking some of these combinations, especially the kind of vast array of combinations that have happened.
Yeah, and then out there you have also that sleeve of the market where they're the serial acquirers, right? Like there are some firms that are just nonstop corporate development, right? And but I think it's going to be interesting. Listen, I know also I wanted to ask you about this. That I know one of the things you personally love is working on balance sheet deals. So maybe you could just chat a little bit about that from your perspective.
Sure. I think people always find the balance sheet deals so uninteresting just because they get a lot of headlines. But so most of my work and my prior experience was on investing the firm's balance sheets. So think, KKR buying a stake in Marshall Wace or an interest in Global Atlantic, the large life and annuity business. At Apollo, I worked on some various initiatives around Athene. And so I think, as it relates to what we're looking at here, I think a lot of that is sort of new in terms of these hybrid businesses. So life, annuity, private equity kind of retirement focused, but in every capacity.
Yeah.
And one thing we are focused on is how to service those clients, right? Which are relatively new conceptually, but have a lot of different needs that aren't well served by the market today, or at least could be better served by the market today.
Yeah.
So large alternative asset managers as kind of an end client are something that we're very focused on. And I think somewhere where some of us have spent a lot of time. So, as we walk in to, a potential acquisition, or we go to meet a company or a management team, like we can really feel their pain. It's not like, oh, hey, what do you do?
Right.
It's,
Yeah.
oh, wow, yeah. So, I know exactly what that means. I know exactly what that filing is. I feel your pain in terms of having to, go back and pro forma 10 acquisitions with different currencies over time. I think, it adds a lot of credibility when we're able to say like, hey, yeah, I've been in that room. Like, I know kind of exactly what you do. And I think the right management teams really respond to that in a really interesting way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a relatively small world, even if it's a big ecosystem in terms of dollars. And so, always looking for new folks and new solutions.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's well said. All right, as we start to wind this down, so we talked a little bit about your agenda for 24. What do if I had to ask you about, tailwinds and headwinds, right? What are the things that you guys are conscious of this year that the things that are going to help you and the things that you kind of have to maybe power through a little bit as a firm?
Oh, that's interesting. I think, given the small number of deals that we do, and again, we can be really selective, I would say we're sort of less macro impacted than a lot
Hmm.
of firms. But I do think, just learning to live in a world of higher rates, it's new, it's relatively new. Folks of my generation basically learned to live in a world of zero rates for our
Yeah,
entire careers. And all of a sudden I'm, seeing SOFR plus 550, and it feels very jarring. And so I think one thing that we've been very cautious around is leverage. We tend not to need it on the deals that we do. So we can decide whether or not we want to put leverage and how much, and we don't tend to use a lot. I think as we sort of grow our business, that may change, but I think that's one place we've been cautious to date. Just, it all feels very expensive at the moment,
yeah,
at least to me. So that's, I think, one place. I think, just figuring out how to compete in this market. As you mentioned, there is a lot of dry powder despite, fundraising challenges in recent years, and figuring out, what makes sense for us to pay up for, I think will be something that we need to figure out. There's a lot of great businesses out there, and you never want to just be beat on price, but also it's a lot of these multiples that we're seeing in the market feel expensive relative to history. And
yeah.
so I think identifying, picking our spots and deciding, what the businesses and partners worth stretching for are, I think will be something that we're really focused on this year. And you add to that some relatively expensive leverage, and that's a pretty tough equation to figure out, but we only need to find one or two deals. So I think we can do
Yeah,
it.
and do you guys? And I should have asked you this at the beginning. Are you generally taking a majority interest, a minority interest, a hybrid of both, or how does that work for our listeners?
Our focus is control deals. That's most of what we do.
Yep.
However, I would say we are uniquely flexible and thoughtful around solving problems for management teams and sellers. And so certainly that should not preclude folks from giving us a call if they think we can be helpful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, excellent management and capital, and like businesses where that you can lever, right? Some of the challenges are kind of what it's all about. All right. So, lastly, Rosie, what would be the last thing you'd want people listening today to know about you guys going into this year? Um,
What would be the last thing which folks should know about us? That's like a lot. That's a lot of pressure. There's like 10.
yeah. Well.
What are the last few things? Look, I think come meet us. Give us a call. We're in New York. We're happy to travel. I think it's a smaller firm with a lot of experience and knowledge and understanding of the space. And so I think folks tend to be surprised when they come by, and we're relatively hospitable. So give us a call, come on over. Happy to meet for lunch or coffee. I think we take all the knowledge of the big places and we add kind of the nimbleness and flexibility and access that you don't have in the context of a bigger bureaucracy. And I think it's a really interesting, cool mousetrap, and it's working so far. So
well, listen, it's funny you say that, because that's how I think about you guys. I think you're very nimble and almost boutique in terms of the high touch that your clients and prospects get. So listen, I want to thank you for joining me today. You've been a great client. It's been fun to get to know you a bit, and I think we wish you the best, your firm the best in 2024, and I'm sure we'll be talking anyway about other things, but thank you for making the time today. It was really a great discussion. So thanks, Rosie.
Thanks so much, George, and a pleasure to be on. Looking forward to chatting about all the other things we're working on together soon.
All right, sounds good.